The night smelled of rain and smoke. Down in the valley, a small fire burned low, one man, one horse, and a sky full of memories he'd tried to forget. The rider sat still beside the embers, hat tipped low, the dying light licking the edges of his weathered face. His name was Colter Hayes, a man who'd once carried a rifle for the Union, and afterward, a burden heavier than lead. He hadn't meant to come back here. Not to this valley. Not to where she was buried in every tree and river. A distant thunder rolled, though the sky was clear. He lifted his head. No storm, no wind, just the hollow beat of drums carried faintly through the hills. Low, steady, ancient. He knew that sound. Lakota drums. He stood, scanning the dark ridge, and for a breath he thought he saw her, tall, proud, standing where the moon cut through the clouds. But the vision faded, and only the whisper of the prairie answered back. "Tala," he said under his breath, her name cracking like old wood. Then, quietly, "But let's go back to where it all started." The year was 1872. The town of Red Hollow sat along the edge of the Black Hills, a line of false front buildings and dust roads, too small for peace and too far from law. Beyond it stretched the wide Dakota plains, untamed, golden, and cruel. Colter Hayes had come there with nothing but a broken rifle and a scar that ran from his shoulder to his ribs. He'd traded his uniform for a ranchman's coat, his regiment for a herd of stubborn cattle that refused to graze. He wasn't looking for trouble or company, but trouble and company found him the spring the Lakota came down from the hills. He first saw her at the river crossing near Dry Creek. She rode bareback, hair braided tight, eyes like thunderclouds. The daughter of Chief Whack-an-Iron. They called her Tala, Wolf Girl. She was known for her fierce temper and sharper tongue. He'd heard of her long before he saw her. They said she'd stood before cavalry guns and told them they'd have to shoot her first before they took another child. They said she feared no man, and certainly not a white one. But that day, she rode down the bank and dismounted near him, her horse snorting at the smell of his mare. Colter had been hauling a broken wagon wheel out of the mud. She watched him silently, rain glistening on her face, until finally she spoke. "You don't belong here." He looked up, eyes narrowed against the drizzle. "Neither do the cattle, but they ain't got nowhere else to go." Her mouth curved, not quite a smile, not quite contempt. "Your kind brings fences. Fences bring war." He didn't argue. He just went back to fixing the wheel. When he turned again, she was gone. That should have been the end of it. But fate's a strange hand in the West. It draws lines where blood has already been spilled. Weeks passed. Then one morning, Colter found her again, this time with a wounded colt tangled in barbed wire. She was crouched beside it, hands slick with blood, whispering to calm the animal as it trembled. "Hold him still," he said, kneeling beside her. She glanced up, startled then wary. "You again?" "Just trying to help." He cut the wire free, his calloused fingers brushing hers. For a moment, everything around them went still. No wind, no birds, just the quiet breath of the plains. Her eyes met his. There was defiance there, and something else buried deeper, something she'd never admit. When the colt was free, it limped toward the river. She rose to leave, but paused. "You fight wars?" she asked suddenly. "I fought one," he said. "Did you win?" He looked toward the horizon. "Nobody does." She studied him for a moment, then turned away. "Then maybe you understand." He didn't ask what she meant. He just watched her ride off into the wind, her braid trailing behind like a black ribbon across the gold of the plains. That night, as he sat by his fire, he caught himself thinking of her. The sharpness in her voice, the strength in her hands. She was everything this land was: wild, scarred, and proud. He knew better than to think of her that way. But the West doesn't care for what's proper. It only knows what's true. And deep down, he knew he'd see her again. Some ties are written in blood, others in silence. Hers, he feared, would be both. 2 months passed before he saw her again. The summer sun had baked the land dry, and the river ran low enough for children to walk across it barefoot. Colter was mending fence posts along the south ridge when he heard the gunfire. 3 sharp cracks echoing through the canyon, followed by the frightened cry of a horse. He froze. Out here, that sound didn't belong to hunters. Coulter mounted up and rode toward it, the wind kicking dust into his face. When he reached the bend near Cottonwood Creek, he saw her, Tala, kneeling beside a fallen man. Her horse was gone, her hands stained with blood that wasn't her own. The man beside her wore blue, a cavalry scout. Dead. She looked up, eyes wide but steady. He shot first, she said. Coulter dismounted slowly, scanning the hills. You need to get out of here before someone finds you. I didn't mean to kill him, she whispered, voice trembling though her face stayed hard. He fired at me. He held up a hand. Don't explain it to me. Explain it to them when they come looking. She followed his gaze. Down the road, a dust trail already rose against the horizon. Riders 5 or 6, moving fast. Her lips parted. They'll hang me. He didn't answer. The smart thing was to leave her. He could turn his horse around, pretend he'd never been there. But when he looked into her face, proud, desperate, afraid in a way she'd never let herself show, he felt something shift inside him. He swung off his coat and tossed it at her. Put that on. Stay low. What are you doing? Burying him, he said flatly. If they find him here, they'll blame whoever's closest. And right now, that's you. Together, they dragged the scout's body behind a cluster of rocks and covered it with dirt and brush. The riders were getting closer now. He could hear their shouts, carried by the wind. Go, he said quietly. Ride north. There's an old trail past the ravine. They won't follow far. Tala hesitated. Why are you helping me, white man? He met her gaze. Because no one else will. She held his stare a moment longer, then turned and vanished into the brush, silent as smoke. By the time the soldiers arrived, Coulter was already kneeling beside the creek, pretending to fix a broken stirrup. Their leader, a heavy man with a gray mustache and a sunburnt face, reined in beside him. Hey, ain't it? The officer barked. You seen an Indian girl come through here? Brown mare, red blanket. Maybe carry in a bow. Coulter squinted at the sunlight. Can't say I have. Saw a couple deer down by the bend, though. Spooked him off with all that shooting. The officer frowned, scanning the horizon. We got a dead man up the ridge. Scout named Miller. Throat open clean. You sure you ain't seen nobody? Coulter shook his head. Ain't seen a soul. The men muttered, uneasy. The officer spat, then turned his horse. If she comes this way, Hayes, you let us know. That girl's killed a U.S. soldier. She's as good as gone. They rode off, leaving dust and silence in their wake. Coulter stayed there a while, the heat pressing down on his neck, the weight of his choice heavier than any rifle he'd ever carried. When he returned to town 2 days later, word had spread. Folks were whispering in the saloon about the Indian girl, about the dead scout, about how some said she'd been seen near Hayes's ranch. The storekeeper, old Mrs. Randall, gave him a cold look when he came in for supplies. You best watch yourself, Coulter, she said, voice sharp as a knife. That girl brings trouble. Always has. Maybe she just brings herself, he replied. Same thing. Outside, 2 ranch hands leaned against a post, lowering their voices as he passed. Man's got no sense, one muttered. Talking sides with them after what they'd done to this country. Coulter kept walking. He didn't owe them an explanation. That night, as he sat on his porch with a cup of coffee gone cold, he saw the faint shape of someone by the barn. He reached for his rifle, then stopped. It was her. She stepped into the lantern light, dust clinging to her dress, eyes rimmed red from sleepless miles. They're still hunting me, she said softly. They burned my uncle's camp. He motioned her inside. Then you're staying here tonight. I can't. You can, and you will. She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. As she stepped through his door, Coulter knew the line he'd just crossed couldn't be walked back. Not with soldiers. Not with neighbors. Not with his own conscience. But some choices, he thought, don't ask permission. They just find you, and they don't let go. The next few days hung heavy with heat and silence. Tala stayed hidden in Coulter's old smokehouse behind the barn, a place that smelled of pine ash and cured meat. He brought her food when the moon rose, never in daylight, never twice at the same hour. By the 3rd night, the quiet had begun to feel dangerous. Coyotes didn't howl. Birds didn't sing. Even the wind seemed to have stopped breathing. Then, just before dawn, came the sound he'd been dreading, the slow grind of hooves on gravel. Coulter stepped out onto the porch, rifle in hand, coffee untouched beside him. Down the road, for riders approached through the haze, cavalry blues, dust-choked and deliberate. The same officer from before led them, his face drawn tight as a drum. "Morning, Hayes," he called, pulling up by the fence. "Hope we ain't waking you." Coulter set his rifle against the wall, forcing a calm he didn't feel. "Sun's been up an hour. What brings you all the way out here?" The officer glanced toward the barn. "We're looking for that redskin girl. Scouts say she's been sighted near these parts again." Coulter's voice stayed steady. "I told you before, I ain't seen her." "Maybe not then," the man said, dismounting. "But maybe now." He nodded to one of his men, who circled toward the back of the property. Coulter's jaw clenched. Ain't no cause to be snooping through a man's home. The officer met his eyes. "You harboring her, Hayes?" Coulter didn't answer right away. The only sound was the creak of saddle leather and the buzz of flies in the heat. Finally, he said, "You'd have to search every canyon between here and the Black Hills before you'd find her. But you're welcome to try." The officer studied him, too long, too still. Then he turned back to his horse. "You've always been a quiet one, Hayes. Folks say you keep to yourself, but I got a feeling that's changed." He mounted up again. "If you see her, you best tell us before someone else does. The law's getting meaner about this kind of thing." Coulter nodded once. "Understood." They rode off slow, the sound of their hooves fading into the rising wind. When the dust settled, Coulter went straight to the barn. He opened the smokehouse door and found Tala crouched in the shadows, hands gripping a small knife, eyes wide. "They know," she whispered. "They suspect," he said. "There's a difference." Her voice was barely a breath. "They'll come back." He nodded. "Aye, but we'll be ready." By evening, the sky turned the color of rust. Smoke drifted from the north, a sign of burning fields or worse. Coulter stood at the fence line, staring toward it, thinking of how fast things fell apart in this land. A rumor, a spark, that's all it ever took. Inside, Tala sat near the fire, hands clasped, her gaze lost somewhere far beyond the walls. When he came in, she said quietly, "They killed my uncle. He wasn't a fighter, just old." Coulter didn't know what to say. He poured her some water, set it by her hand. "I'm sorry," he managed. She looked up, eyes glinting like obsidian. "Your people burn our homes and call it order. We fight back, and they call it war. Where's the difference?" He sighed, rubbed his jaw. "I stopped trying to make sense of war a long time ago. Maybe that's why it keeps happening, Doc." The words stung, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. Outside, the wind picked up again, carrying faint echoes, distant, rhythmic. Drums. Tala stiffened. "They're close." Coulter listened, heart tightening. He could hear it now, the low pulse of war songs from the hills. "Lakota. They'll come for me," she said. "Or for you. Maybe both." He grabbed his rifle and checked the chamber. "If they come, we'll talk." "They won't talk." He looked at her then, really looked. The woman who had once sworn she'd never love a white man. The one whose fire matched his own. He saw fear there, yes, but beneath it, trust. "Then we'll make him listen," he said. That night, smoke rose from the far ridge. A single torch burned against the horizon, a warning or a signal. Coulter sat by the fire, the rifle laid across his knees. Tala stood at the doorway, the wind tugging her braid, her face ghost-lit by flame. "If they come," she said softly, "you must not fight. I'm not looking for blood." "They are." He nodded. Then maybe it's time someone stood between him. Her eyes flicked toward him. "You'll die." He gave a tired half-smile. "Ain't the first time I've been told that." The drums grew louder, rolling through the valley like thunder. Horses screamed in the distance. Tala's voice trembled. "They're here." Coulter rose, slipped his hat on, and stepped out into the darkness. The air was thick with dust and smoke. Across the field, torchlight moved like fireflies in a storm, shadows of riders, painted faces gleaming in the firelight. And in that breath before the storm broke, the world went still. Two nations, one man, one choice left. The riders came from the hills like ghosts, silent at first, then thunderous as the wind turned. Tala stood frozen in the doorway, her lips moving in a quiet prayer. Coulter walked forward into the yard, unarmed but for the rifle slung across his back. The fire from the torches bled red against his weathered face. The lead rider broke from the line, tall, broad-shouldered, his chest painted in ash and ochre. An eagle feather hung from his braid. His eyes were hard as flint. "Coulter Hayes," he said in broken English. "You took what's ours." Coulter stopped a few yards short. "Didn't take nothing. Just helped a wounded woman live another day." The man's nostrils flared. "That woman is daughter of Red Elk, chief of our people. She was promised to another. You kept her here like a thief." Tala stepped out then, her voice trembling but fierce. "No, he saved me when your men left me to die." The warrior turned toward her. For a long moment, his expression wavered, anger fighting grief. Then he looked back at Coulter. "You think you can heal what your kind has burned?" Coulter shook his head. "No, but maybe I can stop one more from burning tonight." The warrior dismounted slowly, drawing a knife whose blade caught the firelight. "Then stop yourself." The circle of riders tightened. The night air filled with the hiss of drawn bows. Tala's breath caught. "Please," she whispered. Coulter didn't move. "If I wanted war, I'd have shot the moment I saw you." He held out his rifle by the barrel and tossed it into the dirt. The gesture hit the air like a stone dropped in water, ripples of silence spreading through the men. Then, in Lakota, he spoke words few white men ever learned. "Midakui Oyasin," he said. "We are all related." It was a phrase Tala had once spoken in the quiet of their firelight. He'd remembered it. The warrior froze. His eyes flickered, shock, then disbelief. "Who taught you that?" Coulter glanced at Tala. She did. The man looked at her, his jaw trembling. "You would betray your blood for him." Tala stepped forward, tears streaking her dirt-covered cheeks. "I betray no one. I only seek peace. You would kill him because he is white. But his heart beats like ours. His pain is our pain." The warrior's breath came heavy, uneven. "You speak like someone who has forgotten her people." She straightened, fire flashing in her eyes. "And you fight like someone who never listens." A murmur ran through the riders. Some shifted in their saddles, uncertain. Then from behind, an older voice broke through the dark, gravelly, wise, commanding. "Enough." A figure emerged from the shadows. An elder, wrapped in a buffalo robe, eyes sharp as moonlight. The riders lowered their weapons instantly. "Red Elk," Tala whispered. "Her father." He dismounted slowly, the weight of years in every step. His gaze swept over Coulter, then settled on his daughter. "They said you were dead," he said. "I nearly was," she replied. "He found me." Red Elk's eyes narrowed. "And now you hide among those who took our land?" Coulter steppet forward, hut in hunt. "Sir, I didn't take nothing that wasn't mine. I fought the same wars your sons did. Lost the same blood. Maybe the wrong flag, but the same heart." The old man studied him a long time, searching for deceit. He found none. "You could have given her up," Red Elk said. "Why didn't you?" Coulter's voice cracked slightly. "Because no one deserves to die just because they were born on the wrong side of a river." For a long, heavy silence, the only sound was the wind moving through the dry grass. Then Red Elk turned to Tala. "You love this man?" She hesitated, not from doubt, but from the weight of what that word meant. "Ido." Coulter's heart stopped. The old chief's eyes softened, not with approval, but with understanding. "Love is the hardest war of all," he murmured. Then, raising his voice, he called to his men, "Go. Leave them." The younger warrior, the one who'd first accused Coulter, protested. "She belongs to—" Red Elk silenced him with a look. "She belongs to no one." The riders exchanged uneasy glances. Then, one by one, they turned their horses and melted back into the night, their torches trailing like dying stars. When they were gone, Red Elk lingered a moment longer. "You've bought her another sunrise," he said quietly. "Make it mean something." Then he too rode away. The night that followed was sleepless. Tala sat by the fire, staring into the coals. Coulter poured whiskey into 2 tin cups and handed her one. She didn't drink. They'll never accept this. He nodded. Neither will mine. For a long time, they said nothing. Only the crackle of fire and the lonely sound of coyotes filled the space between them. Then Coulter said softly, "You could still go with them. Start again." She looked up. "And you? I've got land, debt, ghosts, not much else." She reached across and took his hand, small, calloused, trembling. "Then maybe I stay with your ghosts." He smiled faintly. "They're mean company. I've known worse." When dawn came, the world seemed strangely new. The smoke from the ridge had cleared, and the first snow of winter had begun to fall, soft, white, forgiving. Coulter saddled his horse, while Tala packed what little they owned into a canvas roll. "Where we going?" she asked. He tightened the cinch strap. "South. There's a town by the river where nobody asks questions. We could start fresh." She smiled, a small, tired thing but real. As they rode out, the wind carried faint echoes of the drums again. Not war drums this time, but mourning ones. Coulter glanced back once, toward the hills where Red Elk's riders had vanished. He knew they'd never truly be safe. Not here, not anywhere. But as the sun broke through the clouds and spilled light across the frozen prairie, he felt something he hadn't in years: peace. Maybe it wouldn't last. Maybe it wasn't meant to. But for this one moment, they were free. He reached across and took Tala's hand as their horses moved side by side into the pale horizon. And in that silence between heartbeats, between the sins of the old world and the promise of the new, the West breathed again. Years passed like wind through tall grass, quiet, invisible, yet always moving. By the time the river town took them in, winter had long claimed the prairie. The settlement was small, just a few cabins huddled near the water, a blacksmith, and a chapel with a bell that never quite rang right. But it was enough. For two lost souls, it was home. Coulter worked the land again, slower than before. His limp worsened with the cold, but his hands were steady. Tala tended a small garden behind the cabin, corn, wild onions, roots she remembered from her people's lands. They lived as if the world had forgotten them, and maybe it had. Sometimes, when night fell soft and the wind smelled of rain, she would hum the songs her mother once sang. Coulter would sit in the doorway, pipe smoke curling around him, and just listen. He didn't understand the words, but he understood her heart. That was enough. One evening, a knock came at the door. No rider's silhouette, no torchlight, just the sound of a boy's voice. "Ma'am," it said softly, "are you Tala Hayes?" She froze. No one called her that, not aloud. Coulter rose from his chair, hand near his revolver. "Who's a skin?" The boy stepped into the light. 16, maybe, with dark braids and eyes that mirrored Tala's. "I'm from the Black Hills," he said. "My mother said you'd understand." Tala's breath caught. She stepped closer. "Your mother's name?" "Winona," the boy said. Tala pressed a hand to her mouth. Winona, her cousin, one of the few who survived the raids. "What brings you here, child?" He swallowed. "The army took more of our land. The old chief, Red Elk, he sent me. He said to tell you." The boy's eyes softened. "He said to tell you he remembers the night you chose peace." Tala's eyes glistened. "He lives?" The boy nodded. "Not well, but he lives." She turned to Coulter, her face a storm of emotions. "He forgave us." Coulter's gaze dropped to the fire. "Ain't sure we ever deserved it." The boy looked between them. "He said you'd know what to do next." Coulter frowned. "What to do next?" The boy's jaw set. "They're building a fort near the river. Soldiers. They say the tribes will be moved by spring." His voice broke slightly. "He wanted you to know what's coming." The silence that followed was heavier than gunfire. That night, Tala couldn't sleep. She stood outside under the stars, the cold biting her skin. The Milky Way stretched like a silver scar across the sky. Somewhere beyond the hills, her father waited for the end of his people's land, and maybe his own life. Coulter stepped out quietly behind her. "You're thinking of going," he said. She didn't deny it. "He called for me." He nodded slowly. "Then I'll ride with you." She turned. "You can't, Coulter. The army." He smiled faintly. "Ain't the first time they've wanted me dead." Tala's eyes filled with tears. "Why do you always choose the losing side?" He stepped closer, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. Because it's the only side worth fighting for. They left at dawn. 3 days' ride across snowfields and frozen streams brought them to the foothills and to the camp. Smoke rose from hundreds of small fires. The scent of pine and grief hung in the air. When Red Elk saw them approach, he was sitting outside his lodge, wrapped in furs, his hair now white as river foam. For a long time, he just looked at his daughter, as if seeing her return something he'd lost long ago. "Tala," he said softly, "you came." She knelt beside him, tears freezing on her lashes. "I had to." Coulter stood a few paces back, hat in hand. The old man's eyes found him, and something unspoken passed between them. Two men who had seen too much, and who both loved the same woman in different ways. "You kept her alive," Red Elk said. "For that, I thank you." Coulter lowered his gaze. "Wasn't a favor, Chief. Just the right thing." Red Elk gave a faint smile. "The right thing," he murmured. Strange how few men remember what that feels like. He reached out a trembling hand and rested it on Tala's. "When I'm gone, the young ones will need voices, not guns. Promise me you'll be one of them." "I will," she whispered. Then, after a long silence, he turned to Coulter again. "You love her." "With everything I've got left," Coulter said. "Then when they come for us, stand beside her. Not in front, not behind. Beside. That's how peace begins." Those were his last words. By spring, the fort's flag rose above the valley. Soldiers marched where the buffalo once roamed. The people began their long walk north. Tala walked among them, her head high, her father's spirit burning in her heart. Coulter walked beside her, rifle on his back, eyes scanning the horizon. No man stopped them. No man dared. They settled near the river, on the edge of two worlds, the old and the new. He built her a cabin. She taught the children songs of both tongues. Some called them cursed, others called them legend. They called it life. Years later, when Coulter's hair turned white and his hands began to shake, he would sit outside and watch the sunset spill over the plains, gold, red, and endless. Tala would sit beside him, her hand in his. They never spoke of the night she swore she'd never love him, or the war that almost tore them apart. They didn't have to. Love had found them where hate had failed. And when the wind rose at dusk, carrying the scent of sage and distant drums, Coulter would smile faintly and whisper, "Guess the West ain't so wild after all." Tala would rest her head on his shoulder, eyes glimmering like the stars, and for a heartbeat that stretched forever, it was as if the land itself had forgiven them.